In 1971, a few minutes after the takeoff of an American airline, a passenger sitting in the back seat called the air hostess to him and gave her a letter. The letter contained only a few words that shook the whole of America. Who was that passenger, and why has the FBI not been able to find him dead or alive? It's a long story, but the most powerful intelligence agency in the United States has not been able to find any trace of that passenger for the past 50 years. Welcome back to Beyond the Facts videos. Viewers, this interesting incident began on November 24, 1971 at Portland Airport. A man who appeared to be a businessman booked a ticket to Seattle from Portland and started heading straight for the plane. At that time, there was no strictness on domestic flights in America. Neither was the luggage of the passengers checked, nor was their identity verified. This was a Northwest Orient Airlines Boeing 727, which was to reach Seattle from Portland in just 45 minutes. With sunglasses on, a briefcase. This passenger named Dan Cooper boarded the plane and sat on the back seat of the plane. He ordered a drink for himself and also lit a cigarette. Everything was going fine until then, because smoking was also allowed in the 70s. At 2:58 p.m., the flight took off. As soon as the takeoff was over, Dan Cooper turned around and held an envelope to the air hostess, sitting next to him with a smile. The air hostess, named Florence Schaffner, when she read the letter, it was as if the ground under her feet had shrunk. "Miss, I have a bomb here, and I would like you to sit by me." When Florence Schaffner sat next to Dan Cooper, he opened his briefcase, which contained 8 dynamite sticks and a detonator. In short, the plane was hijacked and Dan Cooper had 3 demands. Before 5 o'clock, he needed $200,000 cash, 2 pairs of parachutes, and a refueling truck ready at Seattle Airport. At the end of his demands, he indirectly told Florence Schaffner that if there was a mistake, I would blow up the bomb. Apart from Dan Cooper, there were 35 passengers on this plane who had no idea about what was going on. Florence Schaffner took Dan Cooper's demands, went into the cockpit, and told the captain the whole story. Another air hostess, named Tina McLeod, now took an intercom and sat next to Dan Cooper, who was working to convey a message between the pilot and Dan Cooper. Remember that this was the first plane hijack in American history that was done for ransom. This is why local authorities and the FBI decided to fulfill all the demands of the hijacker. Obviously, the authorities also knew that Dan Cooper would not be able to run far from them. The flight, which was to land in Seattle in just 45 minutes, now hovered around the airport for the next 1.5 hours. And the remaining 35 passengers, who were completely unaware of this incident, were told that the plane was having trouble landing due to technical difficulties. During this time, 20,000 notes of $20 were collected from the Seattle National Bank, whose serial numbers were noted, and 2 pairs of parachutes were also arranged from a nearby skydiving club. The plane was landed at 5:45 p.m., and as promised, Dan Cooper was given a bag full of money and 2 pairs of parachutes. The plane was also refueled. After fulfilling his demands, Dan Cooper gave permission to 35 passengers and 2 flight crews to get off the plane, while the pilots and 2 flight crews were told to stay on the plane. It was nighttime and the plane took off again. Dan Cooper sent some special instructions to the pilot through Tina McLeod, sitting next to him. He wanted the landing gears and flaps of the plane to remain open, the altitude to be 10,000 feet, the speed to be 320 kilometers per hour, and the plane to be taken straight to Mexico City. The pilot fulfilled all the other demands, but it was not possible to take the plane straight to Mexico City due to fuel. Therefore, the pilot gave Dan Cooper 2 options for refueling: Reno or Phoenix. Dan Cooper agreed to Reno. On the other hand, local and federal authorities were also doing their job. 2 fighter jets were sent behind the plane, but they were not able to maintain such a slow speed, so they started circling around the plane. In the dark of the night, the plane was heading towards Reno. Meanwhile, Dan Cooper asked Tina McLeod to go to the cockpit, where 2 pilots and 1 flight attendant were present. When Tina turned to close the door of the cockpit, she only saw for the last time that Dan Cooper was tying something on his waist. After that, the stairs of the plane opened, and Dan Cooper jumped from there. Whatever happened after that has been discussed since the last 50 years. After 3 hours when the plane landed in Reno, the whole plane was checked properly, but neither Cooper nor any bomb could be found in the plane. Not only in the plane, but after this incident, no trace of Dan Cooper could be found anywhere, neither alive nor dead. After all, who was Dan Cooper? And where did he go by deceiving the eyes of the whole of America? This is the case of the FBI, which has not been closed so far. No one had seen Dan Cooper jumping from the plane, but the staircase was open, so it was clear that he had jumped somewhere between Seattle and Reno. The FBI started looking for evidence on the plane, but unfortunately, they only found Cooper's tie, 8 cigarette butts, and one of the 2 parachutes that Cooper had left behind. After interviewing the passengers and crew, a sketch of Dan Cooper was made according to his appearance. Before Dan Cooper was found between Seattle and Reno, the FBI had to know exactly where he had jumped from the plane. It was not very difficult to find out because the plane was on autopilot. That is, the path on which the plane was flying was already recorded. The speed and altitude of the plane were already known, and with the help of a flight recorder, it was found that the staircase of the plane was open at 8:10. Based on all this information, a search area was defined by estimating Dan Cooper's drop location. This area of 45 square kilometers was surrounded by dense forests and mountains. The aerial team and the land search team searched the entire area, but found no sign of Cooper, no briefcase or money. In fact, it was so cold in this entire area that everyone thought that Dan Cooper must have died. But what happened after that was not even in the imagination of the FBI. For the first time in American history, the FBI started seeking public help for this case. A sketch of Dan Cooper and a $200,000 serial number were also published in the newspapers, and they promised to give a reward for any information about Dan Cooper was also made. They thought that if Cooper was alive, he would definitely spend the money somewhere, but surprisingly, not a single note of that serial number was ever re-released anywhere. But the matter was not over yet. About 9 years later, that is, in 1980, an incident took place. There is a beach on the banks of the Columbia River in southern Washington, which is called Tina Bar. Here, a child was playing with his parents when he found 3 stacks of money on the bank of the river. These were stocks of $20, which amounted to a total of $5,800. The child's parents took the money and went to the FBI. Fortunately, their serial numbers matched those notes that Dan Cooper had taken. This was the first progress in Dan Cooper's hijacking case after 9 years. But instead of solving the case, this incident further complicated the case, because this money was found about 27 kilometers away from the drop location. It was first assumed that the money in the Lewis River in the drop zone must have fallen from Dan Cooper and must have flowed from there to the Columbia River. But later it was noticed that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction. That is, this money cannot flow from the Lewis River and reach Tina Bar Beach at any cost. For the FBI, this matter was getting more and more complicated. Not only that, but Tina Bar Beach, where the money was recovered, was also excavated here in 1974. After 3 years of hijacking, extra sand was dumped on the banks of Tina Bar Beach, and the money found was found in this sand. With this new information, it is clear that Dan Cooper or one of his associates deliberately came to Tina Bar Beach after 3 years to confuse the case and buried the money. With this case, the FBI investigated the people who looked like Cooper, but could not find any special clue. Some theories also say that Cooper was a trained military commando, because the parachute he took with him was a military parachute, and operating it was more difficult than the parachute he left in the plane. As evidence, the FBI has only this ticket in addition to this sketch of Dan Cooper, in which he himself wrote his name, and this tie on which the clip was on the left side, which shows that Dan Cooper was left-handed. This case has puzzled the FBI for the past 50 years. Even today, all the details of this case are available on the FBI website, and the file of this case is still open. I hope you will like and share this video of Beyond the Facts. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next video.